Death is a man in black, and he has gone insane, slaughtering the innocent. Only X, an amnesiac who wakes up to find his wife dead beside him, can stop him. Now, X, along with a band of heroes hunting the man in black, have to embark on a terrifying journey through the cursed town of Crofton and into a haunted house filled with secrets to find the only thing that can stop death. From A. Kale, the #1 best-selling author of Bad Dreams. COFFIN X, a terrifying novel of dark fantasy and horror. Now available on Amazon.
You are listening to the Dark Fantastic Podcast.
Welcome to this new extended episode of the Dark Fantastic Podcast. I'm your host, AK. My guest today is an Oscar-nominated writer, director, and visual artist. I've been a fan of his work for years, especially his film Night Owl, released in 1993, and I'm delighted to have him on the show to talk about his work, his style, making personal movies, and our love for the films of Nicolas Roeg. Please welcome Matthew Patrick. I think it was 15 years ago, and I think I saw it on the Hallmark Channel on cable, that they showed movies that weren't really family movies, you know, the ones they are known for. I think from like 9 p.m. till like after midnight. And they were very, very interesting movies. Usually they were very interesting. And I came across this movie and I didn't know what it was called because I came in, you know, a little bit late. I think I started watching it 15 minutes or 10 minutes into it. And it was Night Owl. And it just hit me like as an art house movie. It wasn't like your typical Hallmark movie by any stretch of the imagination. So I just, you know, that movie just hooked me, and I just loved the mood and how, you know, the classical the whole thing was, the optical effects, the very slow pace of the movie. And I think about 5-6 years later it came out on DVD. And I got a copy, and that was a story on its own, how I hunted down a copy of your movie, because I could only find it in Canada at the time. It's a very long story. Anyway, I found it, and I got a DVD copy, and I got to watch it again and again, of course, in like a pristine, edition. And I loved it even more. So that's how I got into your work, and I discovered that I actually had already watched Hider in the House, and I'd already watched Tainted Blood. So I already knew of your work, but I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know that same director directed, you know, those 3 movies. And I actually liked both movies, Tainted Blood and Hider in the House, before I even got a chance to watch Night Owl. So that's how I discovered your work, and that's how Night Owl, you know, stuck with me. It had that, you know, neo-Gothic art house quality to it that I loved back then, and I still love now. And I just watched it like, I think 2 weeks ago again, and I just love it. But that's my story. So I just don't want to take too much of your time. So I just wanted to tell you how I actually found your movie and how I watched it.
I was very curious about that, and thank you very much. And I'm going to search out the DVD so I could find a better copy of it that I could post, you know. And it was a story that I was really attracted to because I liked that one of the main characters was basically only a voice, and that the power of this character, she couldn't touch anybody physically, but she could lure people like a siren, and putting that in a modern situation in a jazz kind of world was very appealing to me. And I did a lot of sound work and mixing and things before. And so I had a chance to work with Gil Millet, who's like a Blue Note master a baritone sax player, played many gigs, records and things all through the 60s and 50s. So I was excited to work with him, and he came up with that great music for the clubs and for the club music. And so I was really pleased that I could, because I'm a big jazz fan. I love jazz, and fortunately I was able to work with something that had that in it, and had some layers of sound and music and sound effects, and of course the voice, the siren. Even though I think I would change the voice now, I would make it a lot younger and more childlike, sexy that way, and not as authoritative, so that it's gentle. It was just an idea I have now, but I had very little time to prepare for this film, and we made it in 3.5 months. And so I didn't have time to dream about it and dwell about it and come up with what kind of layers of sound I wanted to put in so I could tell it to my sound guys, because there is a certain amount of background sound that I could have used had I had more time, because it really is about subjective and objective sound, voice, like whether it really exists or only exists in someone's head. And so I wanted to like blend that so that it would go from one to the other seamlessly. And so, I mean, I was excited about that opportunity.
We'll get back to Night Owl in a couple of minutes, but before I ask you a little bit about it, I wanted to go back to your childhood, more or less, because reading up on you, you lived in Japan and you lived in India for a few years as a child, and you now live in LA, and you just came back from New York, and you also you say on your website that you before, I think you also stayed in Manhattan and Massachusetts. So you've been around, and you're a world traveler. So that's a lot to take in, you know. That's you've been around. So can you talk a little bit about your journey from, you know, all this traveling and becoming a filmmaker, a mainstream, you know, successful filmmaker who directed features and TV movies, and who also works across different media?
I'd be happy to. You know, when I was in Japan and India, I didn't always know the language. Especially, I knew Japanese when I was very young, but then I lost it when I came to America. So I would return to Japan because my father was a professor every 4th year. And so I learned to observe people and situations and faces and intonations. And that was also in India, so that my eyes were trained early on to, like a detective, to decipher things. And I realized that my eyes are my most precious sense, and that's where I received the most information. And clearly, you know, being in Japan affected my visual, that had an effect on my visual aesthetic. And I also was always interested in, first I was very interested in animation. So like in 4th grade, I made those flip books, you know, where you had cards and you could flip it and there was sort of single frames. And then later in high school, I would make these Super 8 films that were, they did really well in the school. They would let the kids out of the class to come see the films. And then I also did these light shows. So I became very involved with the pure visual, abstract imagery, which when I went to college, I made a movie called Triptych, which is like visual music. It's kind of a synesthesia. What I saw with in my head when I listened to some music, and then I also created imagery, abstract, moving, colorful, geometric images, and then I attached music to that. Anyway, that won a Student Academy Award. It brought me to Hollywood the first time. And then after that, I made a film that took years to make called Atrapados, Trapped. I'm very proud of that film. That taught me everything, and I learned everything through that film. I was the cameraman and the director, and I would rewrite the script, and I would edit it, and the sound design. So it took such a long time. And that's a very surrealist film that I would like you to see sometime. I'll send you a link, because it's a very unique kind of film. It's in Spanish. It's like, I was very affected by Bergman and Fellini at the time. And it's its own animal. And it showed at the San Francisco in the art museum there, and invited to screen at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And that uses color and black and white. So, and then after that, I made this film Graffiti, which is a half-hour film. I went to the American Film Institute as a director. And that film is the story of a man who lives in a South American dictatorship, and he draws for fun during the night, and the next day, like funny drawings. The next day, the junta would go and wash it all off. And so he had fun with that. And so he would draw until someone added to his drawings, so that he became very drawn to that. And it turns out it's a woman. And so there's a kind of a love story where the two protagonists never meet. I'd love for you to see it. It was nominated for an Academy Award and won many, San Francisco Film Festival and Torino Film Festival, won all those. But it has no dialogue. So again, it's purely visual. So I'm very, very attracted to those kinds of themes. And then I made up the Hider in the House, which is, I had a central character that was like the monster, but the studio didn't really understand that I was trying to make him kind of very sympathetic, that he was like a abused child that never grew up. He was looking for love in his life. And unfortunately, I didn't get to do the ending I wanted, where he redeems himself and saves the family. And I was told to make an ending that's a big smash bang, he out of control monster kind of thing. So it all worked, but I think that it would have been a much more upbeat picture if he was able to avoid repeating the abuse that he had in his life with this family. And then from there, I made Tainted Blood movie, which was challenging because I had to do it very quickly while Hider in the House. We had a lot of money at the time. Mimi Rogers was married to Tom Cruise, so it had a lot of visibility. Now, unfortunately, the company that owned the picture was going to distribute it to 1,200 theaters, and then they went broke, and it was terrible. And and Tom Cruise wanted to buy the picture and release it, but they wouldn't do it. It's unbelievable. It really hurt me. And but then I moved on to Tainted Blood and then Night Owl. So unfortunately, I was sick for a while. That knocked me out of the film industry. But at least the films that I did make, I'm proud of. And I'm really glad that you had a chance to see those 3 films.
But going back a little bit to Hyder in the House, because that's a very stylish movie, and it's somewhat more complex than the usual, more or less big budget movie, because Gary Busey, at the time, I think I've always been a fan of his, before all the, the strangeness and, the problem with the PR problems and whatever. But he's always been a very good actor, and he's great in the film. And Mimi Rogers, of course, always delivers. I've always been a fan as well. So how was it like, aside from the things you already mentioned, which had to do with the distribution?
Hyder in the House, it was very cool that Gary Busey was just coming off his Academy Award nomination for, I guess, Buddy Holly's story, and I was excited to work with him. And my whole approach, and I was writing and rewriting, and I worked with 4 different writers to get it into shape from being a slasher picture into a movie that was much more psychologically real and honest. And I even hired a therapist to study the script to make sure that it was realistic. And I even sent Gary Busey, who was terrified, to go see the therapist to talk to him. And it was really funny that finally he went, and he came back and he says, an NAR film. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, it's a no acting required film. That's me, he said. Excuse me. And so he had grown up with a certain amount of abuse too. And I think he really, really delivered. I got along well with him. We had more money for that picture compared to the TV movies, but I think that all the training I had from making Atrapados Trapped came into, I spent 1 million hours on that film. It took 5 years to make that film. And, but I learned everything. And over in that film, it took a long time to shoot in Atrapados because the actor, Julio Torres, who also wrote the script, he weighed 200 pounds at the beginning of the movie, and then he's sort of starving over the course of the movie. And at the end of the picture, he was 120 pounds, and it was real. So there's some very interesting things about that movie. There is definitely nothing you've seen like it. And I may post a new version of it, which I'll send you a link, that has better picture quality. But Hyder in the House ended up getting a lot of great reviews overseas and even in the States. But like I said, it didn't get the distribution that I think it deserved. I ended up using drawings, for example, to express the inside of his mind. And also in the first sequence, it really tells the tragedy of his upbringing through those drawings. And that was the last scene that I created after we finished editing the movie. It needed that kind of backstory. So I created this montage that showed his abuse, and that created a certain amount of sympathy for him, because I really I minimized the violence and I minimized the blood. That's what I like to do anyway. I don't really believe in explicit blood. You don't need it. And keep it really with the characters. So yeah, I wanted him to be a psychologically complex person who had a lot of personal needs. And he wanted and needed love in his life. And the ending I wanted, he ends up saving the family and then dies in the process. But it showed his love and that he was able to break his cycle of violence. And, you know, that was a much more uplifting picture, but I didn't have any control over it. I mean, it's very difficult when you have financial people, producers and things who get things in their mind and they don't really understand the movie, and you're forced to do things. But I do appreciate that they trusted me enough to be able to give me all that money to do it. And gosh, it was great. We were able to fly over to Munich and have a 70-piece orchestra and a 40-person boys choir, like a 500-year boys choir. So we had a lot of great people working on it.
You seem to be really interested in the psychology of the characters and the obsessions of the characters, which is like something, a through line in all your work. So do you agree with that?
You know, I really appreciate you saying that, because that is definitely my intention. And because I'm much more interested in if you know the people, it makes the story much more engaging, and because everybody's psychologically complex, and I don't like black and white characters unless you're making that kind of film, which I don't have anything against. There are a lot of great black and white character movies, but I prefer actually to watch much more psychologically complex movies personally. So I appreciate you saying there's a minimalist kind of quality to it, a certain stated quality and a certain rhythm to it, because that's certainly my style. That's the way my brain works. That's how I visualize the scenes. It's interesting. I mean, what they're doing now, because I watch certain movies and I count how long each shot, I count how many seconds each shot is before there's another cut. And it's become so rapid that, but it works. I mean, but it doesn't always create the depth that a really good movie can deliver. With the characters, where I don't think you need to cut. And, it just sort of is my way. So, like I said, I appreciate your observation that there's a minimalist quality to it. I want to stick to it, to the themes, and try to also create visually thematic elements in terms of uniting the colors and making color decisions before we start the movie.
Going back to Night Owl, which follows Tainted Blood, I think, which you made after Tainted Blood. Yes. So it also has the same qualities you were talking about. It has. It's the story is almost, the plot is very, very simple. The plot of Night Owl, it's almost, there is almost no plot, and the characters there are just a few characters, and but it has, as I mentioned before, this art house quality, and it uses a lot of long lenses, even in wide shots, and a lot of long takes, which are things that you almost never see in a made-for-TV movie. So how did you get involved with that project, and how did you manage to apply that art house minimalist feature film quality to such, I guess, a modestly budgeted movie made for television?
Well, I inherited the project, and I had very little time to make it. I had 3.5 months. I got a green light, and then I had to rewrite it in 2 weeks and start casting And we had a month of preparation, then a month of shooting, and then a month of post-production. So I didn't have the usual time to like mull over it and let it get into my subconscious. I just used my subconscious as much during the making of the picture. And I wished that I had created more layers of sound. And because it is about the characters having objective sound and then having it turn into subjective voices and sound. And I would have loved to layer it up. So the movie has a certain color scheme. I only was able to cast the main characters of, Jennifer Beals and James Wilder like less than a week before we started shooting. And it's funny, but that band, I really like the way the club scenes came out, but we only had one day of rehearsal. It was unbelievable. And so the guys who were all not musicians were able to pull it together and look real, authentic, and that could look really bad. So we got it to work, and I really enjoyed shooting those club scenes. It had a certain style and feeling to it, and a lot of it is about which lenses you decide to use. Sometimes I'm a big wide lens guy, but that's more in my photography. I'm doing a lot of photography now.
Yeah, I'd love to. I've already seen some of your pictures on your website, and before I just jump to that, because I want to ask you about that, I just have one final question about Night Owl.
Please.
Because as you mentioned, the cast of the movie is great, and I especially really like the performances of the women in the movie. Jennifer Beals and Jackie Burrs, I think,
Yes.
the Canadian actress. I think I love the scenes with them together, especially the scene where Jennifer just explains that this whole experience with the siren being the night owl reminds her of a traumatic experience when she was a child, and it's the first time in the whole movie that she actually lets go and shows the emotional side of her. And Jackie Burrs has always been great, and she plays almost like an almost Van Helsing like character. She knows she knows the enemy, and so I love the scenes with them together and throughout the movie. So can you talk just a little bit about working with these two actresses?
Well, Jackie Burroughs in Canada especially is a very famous actress and very well respected. And I feel, honored that I had a chance to work with her. And that scene that you're talking about we shot it like on the second or third day. That's how it got scheduled. So I think that there was a certain anxiety that Jennifer had. We got a whole movie in front of us. And I think the assistant director, terrific guy, put that up front before she got comfortable. And that was a really good choice. Now, we took that whole scene in a single shot, so that we didn't have to cover it in any way. There was no cuts in it, so that we could keep the motion with them. And I think it feels very authentic. And that was a very, I'm glad it came out as well as it did, because it could also look very false. And I really enjoy working with female actresses. Like in Tainted Blood, there are like 5 lead women, and they're all really good. and I essentially castrate the males, which are the husbands, and I kept men out of the picture, basically. And so, like I said, I think I really understand or enjoy the psychology of working with women. I think they're more psychologically complex, and I've always gotten along well with women and been very fortunate in my relationships. So, getting into their minds is intriguing to me, and if I were making more films, I'd love women to be the center of the picture. And Jennifer, you know, I just watched pieces of the film just now, and I love her understated performance. And it was difficult to get because she and I saw things differently to a certain degree. So there was a little push and pull. And but in the end, I think it came out really well. You know, the fact that we didn't have any computers, that we had to do all the effects in the camera, which is tricky as hell. And I have one shot of the night owl walking down an alley, and then there's a shot of her, and she's naked, and I really love that you could pretty much see her completely naked in front. You could see her breasts, and you could sort of see down below. And I wanted to slip that through, you know what I mean? Originally, I had it even more obvious, and the producer caught it and said, wait a minute, we can't do this. I thought it'd be really funny to do, you know, and I feel kind of, you know, you slip things in here and there that just you think is kind of cool for fun.
Did it show first on a major network, or was it shown first because I couldn't find the information about where it actually premiered on television?
Well, Night Owl was a project for what is it? The Women's Channel, the
Lifetime.
Lifetime. It was a Lifetime movie originally, and then Tainted Blood was for USA Channel, but now they're getting distribution elsewhere. So yeah, it was a Lifetime movie.
Yeah, it's they are doing riskier stuff now. They're doing the V.C. Andrews books, you know, Flowers in the Attic and stuff, which you know, it's a bit controversial. But back then, when Night Owl was made, I guess there was nothing like it at all on Lifetime.
I think you're right. And that's what really drew me to the material, is that the main character, one of the main characters, was a voice that had no physical presence. And the script was too long originally. So I had to cut out and needed to be rewritten to a big degree. So I had to cut out about 20 pages and kept rewriting while we were casting and all that kind of process. So yeah, I didn't even watch any Lifetime movies at the time. So that's kind of good that I just sort of did what I do without researching, and they kind of let me do what I did, pretty much what I do. And, you know, I just rewatched some of it. I think it's a really good looking movie, and it's got a good flow, and the camera work is good. I mean, and the club scenes, and there's a scene where there's a huge group of dancers and stilts and all the kinds of huge crowd scene separating Jennifer Beals from James Wilder. That came about when someone told me about that when I was in Toronto, where we shot it. Someone said, oh, there's this festival kind of thing, and it does this. And I said, hey, let's put it in. And we did, and it was so cool. So, you know, the thing grows while we're preparing it, you know. And like in Hydra in the House, we were shooting, we still didn't have the ending, because I kept fighting for the redemption ending. And So, it's a process, it's a struggle. There's no time for any personal life. But yeah, I didn't study Lifetime. I'm glad. I mean, Lifetime has to become more controversial because there are so many other outlets now, is my thinking. But I hear their budgets are much smaller.
I just want to ask you about, something you mentioned about the redemption ending of Hider in the House. Did you actually shoot that, or you never got to shoot it?
I never got to shoot it.
Yeah.
We wrote a whole thing where there's a character from the mental institute who follows Gary Busey to the house and threatens the family. And in the end, the character, Gary Busey, saves the family from this guy and dies in the process. So he doesn't repeat the cycle of violence like the way it is now. And so I had no chance, when we're shooting, you do things so carefully because there's just never enough time, so that you pretty much use every shot, especially in the TV movies. Like in Tainted Blood, I realized I used every single shot except one, and after you shoot a picture, I sit down and write down how I see it edited, because I remember all the shots because it took so much work. So I wished I had a chance to shoot that other ending. God. And I met the producer on the picture, Steve Ruther, like at the Academy Awards, because I've been to the Academy Awards a bunch of times because I'm a member. And I said, oh, yeah. And he said, you're right, we should have done the other ending.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And so I like to think that the pictures are sort of timeless, except the hair and the clothes,
Yeah, the same goes for your TV movies as well, because as I mentioned, I recently rewatched Tainted Blood on YouTube. And again, it has the same visual, style, and it's polished, and the way you deal with the characters is it's a bit, I don't like the word edgy, but it's a bit more complex, than usual with TV movies, which is again a signature of all your films. Again, I've been a fan of your work for more than a decade, so getting to ask these questions, it's just, amazing to me, because I'm really into film history as well. And I always try to, on my website and on my podcast, I always try to highlight, projects, mostly movies, but also books and music that I think aren't appreciated enough. And now that you can find any movie online now, or you can buy a copy on DVD, because they put everything out now. So I'm really glad that I'm able to talk about your work and Night Owl now, because it's available online and it's available as a DVD. So people listening to this hopefully will rediscover it and will rediscover some of your work. And I'm really enjoying it as well, talking to you. And I want to talk about what you're working on now and your photography, because you mentioned that you don't do movies anymore. And before we get to the still photography, why don't you make more movies? Aren't you interested in making movies anymore, even short movies, because it's easy, it's easier than ever to actually make movies, at least short movies. And I'm sure you have the equipment and the technology. So are you interested in making more movies?
Yes, I've written several scripts and rewritten them, and all for feature projects. And I own this property in Joshua Tree. I bought it more than 20 years ago, all rocks and beautiful nature and things. So I wrote a script called Stranded, which is again both a thriller and a psychological character piece that all takes place 95% on my property. And I wrote the script for existing structures. So like there's a house and then there's an unusual other area, and which is almost there's like a Russian genre a long time ago where you basically write a script around what you have. So I have this script and it could be done for, I don't know. I mean, I talked to one producer who's very good and he says $6 million, but I'm thinking, gosh, maybe we could do it for much less. And so my interest in movies is as passionate, well, not as passionate. It's as passionate as ever, but I just don't have the representation I once had at William Morris. And I don't have access to the money like I used to. And I'm not really a producer. I'm like the creative person. So I've got to find partnerships with people who believe in the work. So I mean, I spent a lot of time on this Stranded picture and the script, and I think it's gotten pretty good. And you know, it has to do with the lead character is a 28-year-old therapist. So there's a whole psychological component, who goes on a trip, a vacation out to the desert with these three very, very wealthy people and her age. And they get kidnapped essentially and terrorized and things. In the beginning, actually, they lose the car keys, they can't escape, the internet goes down, they're getting terrorized by people. And then we find out that one of the rich people had hired these people to terrorize everybody as a big joke. So we put a twist in there at the end of the first act. But then the rich people and the poor people, who are the desert people, sit down to have dinner together. And then there's a true conflict between the rich and the poor. So there's a whole kind of class issue within this picture. And for the first time in their lives, these rich people can't buy their way out. So that's what I'd like to do. But at the same time, I'm doing this photography to satisfy my creative urges. So I'm not really completely out at all. I just have to figure out how to get back in. And that's difficult, especially once you grow a little older. So no, I'm not out of the movies. I'm just struggling to get one made. It's very hard to get any movie made. And I really respect any movie that gets made, even if it's a crappy movie. It's just so hard to do. So I respect all filmmakers. And, you know, it's actually very funny that I was going to do this film for Miramax. And of all the movies, I mean, I pitched them, what the hell, right? And I was going to direct a Halloween movie, which is like so against my style, right? Because it's so explicit. But I was going to make it my style again, with a deep psychological kind of qualities within the characters. And unfortunately, 2 weeks before shooting, we got shut down because it turned out that the Miramax, Bob Weinstein, they didn't have the rights. So that got shut down. And a couple of years later, it got done with some other people. But, you know, it's funny, you know, that I probably would have been a terrible failure because I wouldn't have made it all bloody. So maybe it was for the better.
I haven't seen the new, Halloween movies. I've always been a fan of John Carpenter's, and some of the sequels are interesting. And they have, with the remakes, with the Halloween sequels and remakes, there have been like more than 10 Halloweens now. Mm-hmm. And they go in different directions. And some of them are, more low-key than others. So it would have been just fascinating to see your take on it.
Yes, wouldn't have been? It would have been great to just see another way to do it, because usually I get really good reviews, but this, I I don't know. I mean, I again made it character oriented, and like, you know, the kid in the beginning who's the brother of Jamie Lee Curtis in the first movie. I made it so he became completely afraid that the monster is coming back. So I had him like set up in a metal shipping container in a factory where there's cameras all around. So he's like basically in a safe house. He's in a escape room, you know, so that it was all about his inability to leave that, but he has to in order to save the girl he likes, you know. And so I think that would have been very interesting, you know. Then again, it's about psychology of overcoming this fear of and trauma. It just seems like all my films, or at least a couple of them, are about people who've been abused early in their lives and then how they overcome it. It's kind of an interesting theme. It would have showed up there.
Yeah, because, you know, talking about your style and how you would have approached Halloween, if you go back to the very first Halloween, the best one, the John Carpenter one, it was
like
actually
that one very much.
Yeah, that was basically an art house movie. There was very little blood in that movie, so it's not that far off that your take would have been, you know, it would have maybe just circled back to the original style of the very first one. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, because I didn't even watch the other Halloweens as research, because I wanted to start fresh. And strangely, I don't watch a lot of movies. I'm a member of the Academy, so I judge like certain films, like the foreign films and the short films. I think there's a lot of really short dramatic films that are just unbelievably great, and I just really hope that someday there's going to be a streaming channel that just has short films, because there's a certain brilliance in them that nobody gets to see. But yeah, it would have been totally different, perhaps. I don't know. I mean, afterwards, I watched the Rob Zombie one, and it's just like there's no character. There's just a lot of blood, and there's some gratuitous sex, and it was so simple-minded, you know, that I couldn't really watch it. You know.
Yeah. It's just, you know, with the, you already mentioned how many movies or most mainstream movies are made now with the super fast cuts, and you know, it's all aimed at teenagers basically, because they are the ones who are buying the tickets, and it's all tent poles now. And of course there are great movies being made. Most of them, you know, are released on VOD or Netflix or whatever. They are being made, but the mainstream ones, and I consider Halloween to be, you know, the Halloween movies to be mainstream. They are just, you know, I think they think the audience isn't interested in low-key movies or minimalist filmmaking, or what Paul Schrader calls transcendental filmmaking, you know, to some extent. So I think they think that people aren't interested in that anymore, and they might be right. I don't know, because these big movies with the super fast cutting and the CGI, they make lots of money. So
it's like that stuff, yeah. You know, if I did the Halloween, I would have had the characters, but then I would have had to create, and I would have enjoyed creating some really interesting, horrific, not as bloody, but like scary as hell stuff. It would have been fun to do, you know, with chase scenes. And, you know, I got a good imagination actually for horror. If I wanted to, I could just draw upon it so easily that it would have been fun, you know, if I could have looked at it that way psychologically, but at the same time, like say, make it a modern picture. You know, I just flew back from New York yesterday, and I was watching the new Spider-Man, and it was like, wow, every 4 or 6 seconds, there's a cut. It's just unbelievable. Very well done, but I got so bored. And by the middle of the picture, I just turned it off. I was impressed before with the technology and the use of the camera, but I don't know, it just is stupid after a while. At least I feel that way.
No, I agree with you. As I have nothing against, mainstream cinema, and I love movies, because if you love movies, you love all movies. But and I read comic books, and I used to read them as a kid, and I still read them now. But it's not really what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying, because it's not really the genre that's bad, or or the idea of comic book movies in itself. Is just the approach, whether it's Halloween or Spider-Man or the Marvel stuff. And I haven't seen the new Batman movie, but the Francis Ford Coppola just had an interview, and he kept talking about these movies, including Dune and I can't remember the name of the last James Bond movie. And he says all these movies are just very well-made movies, like you just said. And the filmmakers are working, at the top of their level. But if you watch them back to back, they all feel the same in some way or another. So, and speaking of Coppola, I just remembered something related to what you're saying, because Coppola also writes and makes movies, in where he lives, actually, because he also has this vineyard. Of course, I know you know about that. And he makes movies there. He writes movies, and the last couple of movies he made, in the last 20 years, he actually, I think a lot of them, and even one of them called Twixt, starring Val Kilmer. It's a horror movie, psychological horror movie. He shot it in his vineyard. And it was made, I think, with very, affordable high-def cameras. And that was like 15 years ago. The cameras weren't that great back then. But it's a very interesting movie, and it has some very interesting things. So even Coppola, does that. So what you're saying, the way you want to approach Stranded is... isn't that weird as maybe others would think? It has been done. Coppola has done it, and I'm sure others have done it as well.
Yes, maybe I could do this movie for $1 million, because it's all there, it's all on the property. Maybe I could use all unknown actors, because you really don't need it, so you could pay them scale and put all the money into the production. But like you say, the cameras and the equipment are so good now and so inexpensive. And now, for example, you don't need to put down dolly track. You could just use these gimbal, electric gimbals now to hold the camera, and it's like a steady cam, and it's just unbelievable what you could do now. The short films that I made, they're technically very good. And it's kind of a freeing kind of time. So maybe I should be more optimistic and somehow reach out more. But you're absolutely right that, if Coppola's doing that on his vineyard, I could do it on my property.
Maybe, that's what I'm saying. Yeah,
I got to do it. You're right.
Yeah, because the missing ingredient in movies now is basically vision. It's basically vision and a willingness not to compromise the personal aspects of the story, because that's what Coppola talked about, and that's what you also talked about when you mentioned blockbusters and the new Spider-Man movie. They aren't personal anymore. The movies, they are very well crafted, and these filmmakers are very talented, but there is no personal touch. And your work, that's what always appealed to me about the movies that you made. And talking to you now, I understand more about why those movies work. Is the personal touch, is the obsessions of the filmmaker and what they bring to it, technically, aesthetically, philosophically. Now movies are either, made for kids, which isn't a bad thing in itself. But not all movies should be made for kids, or either movies are just very, overtly politicized, because that's now the trendy thing. Because either you make movies so political, or you make them for kids or whatever, but they aren't personal. Because if it's personal to you, like even the movies you made, like for TV, for example, even if they are not written by you, they also have your touch. For example, your interest in psychology and obsessions, and of course your trademarks, your technical trademarks, using certain lenses and so on, and which makes sense now, since I know now that you love still photography. So that's what's missing in movies. So I think a filmmaker like you, if you made movies now using the technology that's available now, with your personal vision, which has nothing to do with aiming movies at kids, or with trying to be preachy. That's what I mean by politics, is basically trying to be preachy, whether regardless of your politics, because I hate politics and I never really get into it. But I guess the personal aspect is missing, and that's what makes your movies so stylish and enjoyable.
Well, thank you, because that's certainly my intention, is to tell an intimate story that it has to have a feeling to it, and the whole movie has to have not just the style, but the voice and the character that's individual, And when you said all those Marvel movies are the same, it's so true. You could watch one after the other, and it's just a wreck, really. So those Marvel movies are really not made by the director anymore. I don't really think so. They're made by the effects team and the stunt coordinators. All the director pretty much does is okays the storyboards, because it's all pretty much action, and work with the actors, who are all very limited, because the storyline, in order to accommodate the storyline's all about nothing personal that much. So yeah, you see these famous directors now who made interesting independent pictures that have great feeling to it, and the studios hire them because I think it's prestigious, and then the movies still look the same, and everything that made the movie that the director made the independent film or whatever, it's all washed away. And yeah, I mean, it's so true what you're saying. I mean, I saw made sure to go see one of the Fast and Furious movies in a theater, and it was so well done. The characters are so stupid and the lines are so stupid, but it was it batters you, it just smashes you. So by the climax, I fell asleep. I was so tired. Really, really.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people won't like that, yeah, but I agree with you 100% that the Marvel movies put me to sleep as well. I don't watch them anymore, to be honest. I don't watch them, and the DC movies aren't better. The blockbusters, all of them now, even Dune. Dune. I'm a big fan of the book, and even the new Dune movie is just amazing to look at. But there's something off, with the soul of the movie. There's no, it's not sentiment or even heart. There is no warmth. You can't really. There is no personality. The personality of the filmmaker isn't really there, other than the technique, because that director is just you can tell that he loves the big canvas and the visuals, like Ridley Scott, because he's a huge fan of Ridley Scott. And it's just they look amazing. They used to call them shooters. They used to call this type of directors,
right.
But they are all shooters now. There is true. Yeah, there are very few filmmakers. I basically I just watch Paul Schrader movies because he's the only filmmaker, of that mentality, the transcendental filmmaking, and who actually loves filmmaking and who tells very personal stories. He's the only filmmaker working now of that generation or of that, temperament, who's still making movies now. He's still trying to get funding and trying to get stars. And even though I didn't like the last movie he made, I don't know if you watched it. I don't know even if you are a fan of Paul Schrader.
I like Paul Schrader. There's a certain roughness to it, and he really knows how to create character. And I just recently watched, Taxi Driver again. How could you go wrong with that? So yeah, he's a great filmmaker, and he's done a lot of different kinds of things. And and he takes chances, but I know what's his name, Chris Nolan. My daughter is friends, grew up together at school with the Nolans. And anyway, his Batman movies were good. You know what I mean? They were.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, they were great.
Here's a tentpole movie that actually had really interesting damaged characters, and it's quite compelling, really. And so we could use more of that, exactly.
And more intimate projects, because Christopher Nolan also is a writer-director, which I think is also part of the secret of why his movies are many of his movies are so great.
I agree with completely. And he's a complete genius. The fact that he could make one movie after another and write the scripts, I don't know. I just blown away by him, it's just at a whole nother level. And I think he sees in black and white. I think his vision is black and white, which is kind of interesting. He hires a good production designer to create the colors, but maybe that affects his thinking because he's not cluttered with the idea of color. I should look into whether he only sees in black and white, but he's one of the few big filmmakers, the tentpole filmmakers that you say that have any kind of personality, or there's something more going on. These Marvel movies, nothing against them, but man, they bore me.
Yeah, you're not alone. Yeah, they bore a lot of. I think if you are outside the age bracket, you're either an aging comic book fan. So you just wanna support the team, basically take one for the team. If you are an older viewer, or if you are a younger viewer, you just they look like video games. So because I have nephews who are teenagers, and they tell me they are just, these movies are just amazing. They feel like video games, and they are saying it in a way that to them that's a good thing. They are not saying it as a criticism. So
wow.
So that's basically it. You are either, if you don't like the Marvel movies, you are either outside the age bracket, or you love movies. Because if you love movies, really love movies and love filmmaking, you can't really find anything to enjoy unless you watch them, in small doses, maybe.
These Marvel films, I don't think they even need to have a movie star in there. They buy everybody up because they could afford them, but they don't really use them. They're kind of like cardboard. And real movie stars.
Yeah.
It's a different time. Do you ever watch the Criterion channel on streaming that?
Yeah, no, everybody's telling me about it, but I haven't, I haven't subscribed to it because I have so many movies, backed up. Basically, I just have the to watch list is just backed up. I still have DVDs that I haven't watched because I always discover new movies. And I'm always, interested in reading about film history and, interviewing different people, and the people I interview, you know, they turn me onto different things that I don't know about. I'm always discovering new things. So I just can't subscribe to another, you know, streaming service, because I have the Criterion DVDs. I have some of those.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I have like the Hitchcock ones, and I'm also a huge fan of the Archers, you know, who directed The Red Shoes and Black Narcissus.
Oh my God, The Red Shoes. Talk about,
yeah.
I don't know, that transcends movies or something. I don't know, kind of epic.
Yeah. And Nicolas Roeg, of course, I know you like you love his work. Yeah.
I'm so happy I had a chance to meet him and be able to take down his stuff. And I would watch his films, like, I don't religiously, like, you know, Don't Look Now and Walkabout and Performance, and I would watch him religiously every year, because I mean, his mind is so interesting, and he casts against character, and of course no one can beat him in terms of how he uses the camera. Man Who Fell to Earth. And I'm so glad you got a chance to meet him, and I met him too briefly, but I'm sure you got a chance to get a lot of answers from his question. You know, he's one of the real great guys. But,
yeah, actually, I got a chance to work with him for like I think a month. I got to you know, to work with him as his assistant, him and his wife.
wow.
They were traveling, and I got a chance to work with them during certain film festivals. And back then, that was, I guess, like I think 2007. I guess I was just out of college back then, and I just had this opportunity to you know, just, you know, these things just fall into place. You know, I had no real experience, very little experience, but I had done a movie, I had done a feature film, and I was working with an NGO at the time, and the NGO was actually helping him, you know, do these film festivals. As a, you know, as a judge, basically. So I got to work with him, and I was starstruck when I met him, because I can't remember, I was very young, and I met him, and he has a very dry sense of humor. He had, I mean, a very dry sense of humor, and he's very moody. You know, he can snap at you suddenly because not in a way that would upset you, or on an offensive way or anything. He was a lovely guy, but he was moody, and if you don't really understand him, you would say that he's a, you know, kind of on the chilly side, but he isn't. He has a very dry sense of humor, and he doesn't like to, he's not very effusive, you know. He didn't really like to talk a lot unless he got to know you. And I got to know him fairly well, and his lovely wife, I try to stay in touch with her to this day, Harriet. They were lovely people, and I got to ask him a few questions, like you said, and he basically, because there was this myth that he was offered to direct a James Bond movie, and he declined the offer. So I asked him about that, and he just went into this very funny story about what he would have done with it, and it was hilarious. You know, it was just amazing, and he was so generous. You know, later on, I got to consult with him on one of my feature films that I never made. I sent him the script, and he was actually having health problems at the time. And he actually got back to me, and he gave me some feedback, and he watched because I only wrote and directed one feature film, and he watched it, and he said he liked it very much. So he was just so generous, and his wife also, you know, he was basically he wasn't very effusive, and his wife just, you know, complemented his personality because she was so lovely and so warm, and they were such a great match, and it was just a magical time being with him, you know, that for those few weeks. And I stayed in touch with him for years, you know, him and his wife. So he's just, I guess he's different. I know you met him briefly, but I guess he's different than what people would think he is, because he has a reputation as someone who's a bit, as I said, you know, a bit off-putting. You know, he's not approachable. I've talked to a lot of people who you know worked with him briefly, or who didn't know him very well. They say he isn't very approachable, but he isn't. But not in you know, in an elitist way or anything. He just is kind of an eccentric guy, very, you know, very intellectual. Of course, you can guess that from his movies. Just a lovely experience. I cherish it, and I always tell his wife, his widow, Harriet, I always tell her that, especially when he died a couple of years ago, I you know, got in touch with her, and I just told her how much I enjoyed my time with him, however brief it was. Personally, it was brief. It was only a few weeks, a month maybe. Later on, we talked on the phone. I talked on the phone with him, and I told her how much I enjoyed that time. And she said, you know, after he died, like, there was a flood of phone calls and emails saying how much a lot of people who interacted with him found him to be a very warm guy, actually, a very generous man, which is different than how he basically maybe presented himself. I don't know how people saw him, maybe. But yeah.
He was warm to me, but I only had one meal with him. But I think that what you're saying is very interesting, a very intellectual guy. And it shows in his films they're not at all, there's no, what do you say? It's an intellectual approach. What is the word? There's no, he doesn't make it sappy. It's always down to earth. It's always, there's nothing about it that's affected. It's just so realistic that he makes his...
I guess I think you're saying he isn't pretentious, basically. His work isn't pretentious.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And also it's not soft. It's really, it doesn't play to the audience at all. He just does what's the right thing. And that's interesting how you explain it, you know, because his films are very, you can identify with the characters, but it's not warm.
The thing I remember, you know, that also has to do with what you've been saying about working in movies in Hollywood. The funny thing is that he didn't say that to me, but I know it, you know, from reading later about him and from speaking with people who actually got to meet him later on, when I wasn't really in contact with him anymore. He was really struggling with financing his movies, you know, really struggling with, he made I think his last movie was called Puffball. He made it, I think, in 2006. And after that, I worked with a couple of independent filmmakers from England. One of them was called Martin Pickles. He was an animator and he made short movies. And he had met Nicolas Roeg, I think, somewhere in a festival in France or something. I can't remember. And he met Nicolas Roeg, and he knew him, I think, from the same festival I worked with Nicolas on. And when he met Nicolas later on, a couple of years later, he said, "Hi, Nicolas, and what are you working on?" and so on. And he told Nicolas that I'm here in this festival, you know, trying to push my short movie and looking for financing. And Nicolas said to him, you know, we'll probably be talking to the same people looking for money.
Exactly.
So it was just Martin was just blown away because Martin was just starting up as a young filmmaker and he had only directed a couple of shorts. But he was amazed, he told me he was amazed that the great Nicolas Roeg, the man they talk about in books about movie making and film history, is actually struggling to find financing for his next project. So that just tells you everything, I think, about movies, about making movies, I mean.
It's so true. I was at the Directors Guild and there was this guy, Christopher Columbus. He made the first
he made Home Alone, I think.
Harry Potter movie and stuff. And he was saying he was trying to get money. He was trying to get a film made. He couldn't get anything made. So you get a really commercial film maker like that, and he's having a hard time. And there's a lot of ageism, a lot of people don't want to work with people over a certain age. They want the new latest hot thing. So probably your friend, who's a young filmmaker with a couple shorts, may have even had a better chance than Nicolas Roeg.
Yeah, maybe. And thank you very much for being so generous with your time and for answering all my questions about your work and especially about Night Owl. And I look forward to watching Trapped and watching your short films as well.
Ahmed, thank you so much. And I enjoyed this conversation with you so much because you have a great knowledge of film and history of cinema and have a lot of insight as to what's going on now and what's going on then and back then. And thank you. It was so enjoyable. My gosh, I'm really talking to someone who knows film. Such a pleasure.
Look, I don't know what you're doing here.
What I'm doing is I live here now. I live here with Julie.
I think you should go.
Neil. No.
He's up there.
Julie.
Planning. Watching. Waiting. Vestron Pictures presents Gary Busey, Mimi Rogers, Hyder in the house.
I'd like to end this episode with the poem SIRENS SONG by William Browne. This version of the poem is read by Caprisha Page and is available for download from the Librivox website. Thanks for listening, and please join me again on the Dark Fantastic podcast.
Steer. Hither steer your winged pines, all beaten mariners. Here lies love's undiscovered mines, a prey to passengers. Perfumes far sweeter than the best which makes the phoenix earn and nest. Fear not for your ships, nor any to oppose you save our lips. But come on shore, where no joy dies till love hath gotten more. For swelling waves our panting breasts, where never storms arise, exchange, and be a while our guests. For stars gaze on our eyes, the compass love shall hourly sing, and as he goes about the ring, we will not miss to tell each point he nameth with a kiss. Then come on shore, where no joy dies till love hath gotten more.
You've been listening to the Dark Fantastic Podcast. Ahmed Khalifa is a filmmaker and novelist. He is the writer-director of several short films and a feature, released on Netflix, and the author of a number of novels and short stories, including Beware the Stranger, available on Amazon.